Hi, my name's Austin Parenti,
And my name is Aaron Mejias.
and I'm starting off this episode because that's our tradition, dare I say.
Well, welcome back to the Academy Podcast. We got a new song, new philosopher, and a new book for us to cover. A brand new series.
Yes, very exciting that we got out of the cave, so to speak, in Plato's Republic.
Well, not to say that this thinker is necessarily the truth, but
No, of course. But it is an interesting step forward because we are able to now go forward in history to one of the next standout moments, one of the next milestones. And so we have a philosopher here who's building on the classics, certainly.
Well, he is part of it. He's part of the classics.
Well, rather,
sure.
I mean, classical Greece, taking Plato and Aristotle and now taking a nice big leap in a new direction, which is very exciting.
And what's funny is that, because there's no rhyme or reason to necessarily what we pick. We're not going in any sort of historical order here. But I just found it funny that we did Plato, and I let you pick the next one, and you picked Epictetus. And Epictetus is like directly influenced by Plato. The Stoics are, they're influenced primarily by Plato and the Cynics. Mm-hmm. And it's like we didn't go too far because honestly, we could have gone to something entirely modern and it had been
It's true, but I don't know because for me, when I first read the Stoics, I felt like they were the most immediately rewarding. Their little catchphrases and terms and ideas are the ones that stick in my head most of any of the philosophers we read. And so I think if you look at the core word of philosophy, right, the love and pursuit of wisdom, I feel like in some ways the Stoics capitalize on that more than some other groups that again claim the term philosophy, but looking at that root again, love of wisdom, sometimes it seems far from that.
Can I talk a little bit about that?
Yes,
just really
totally.
quick. It's funny is that you bring that up, and that's actually going to be a main point because Stoicism is very much about practical wisdom. It's very much about how do you actually practice this day in and day out. It's very grounded. A lot of philosophy we feel as if it's very, because even Plato, it was kind of getting away from us a little bit.
Yes.
Where it was like, oh my gosh, he's talking about veridical versus existential, and we're talking about forms and it's heady, and where Stoicism is going to be a lot of moral maxims. It's going to be about do literally this, do that.
Right.
It's all about ethics and behavior. And so that's why, honestly, two things about Stoicism is that one is that it's rising in popularity in our modern day. I think a lot of people are starting to see Stoicism and really embracing it for what it is now. And I think it has a lot of appeal, especially to men. I think it has a lot of appeal. And a lot of journals and articles and things like that are coming out of like embracing Stoicism and refounding Stoic ideals. But that's it's also a double-edged sword because now you have all these unfortunately a lot of who I think are probably the worst people in existence, which are motivational speakers. Hacks like Tony Robbins and the like, who I think are worse than politicians. They and really what they did and what they do today is that they read people like Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius. They read probably half the book, think it's great, and then they make some sort of TEDx talk or motivational tour, and then they literally just sell you hundreds of dollars in tickets, for them to just tell you what the Stoics have already said thousands of years ago.
Right, what you could have gotten for
if you actually read the book, right?
Yeah.
And so
go down
here
to
we
the
are.
public library.
We are now the new motivational speakers.
Now, so in the past we've done this. I think I recall with Plato's Republic. I spoke a bit of the kind of general layman's understanding of the work, and then you.
I don't know. You're
Well, I certainly, because of my love for the Stoics, I feel like I'm a little more versed than
probably more well-read than I am. You should lead this up.
But no. But I still remember what my perspective was going into my first class on Stoicism. And here's what I said. The professor asked, what is a Stoic? And I said, when I think of a Stoic, I think of someone who's emotionless. That was the first word that came to mind.
Yeah, it's a common conception.
Right. And so maybe you could speak to that. And then also my second corresponding thought was they're like the Jedi Knights. The Jedi Knights,
Also a common conception.
right. They don't marry. They have their laws and they try to stay calm. And I think of Qui-Gon Jinn in episode 1, who shows no range of personality. Even though you have one of the best actors of our time. So that's how I viewed Stoicism going into the class. Now, my guess is that there will be some people listening to our podcast who also have related those thoughts. So can you first start by answering those thoughts and those conceptions?
Okay, so all right, so before we actually get into Epictetus and his biography and things like that, we'll clear up those misconceptions about Stoicism. Okay, so I'm going to try to avoid getting into the philosophy and being like, well, it actually says here that, blah, blah.
Right.
So to address the idea of the emotionless, I think that's the big hurdle. I think a lot of people think that Stoicism is all about getting rid of emotions, and I think that there are some, and so to take a step back, we have to remember that there are different kinds of Stoics,
Sure,
right?
of course.
And I mean, they definitely have a lot of relation with each other, and it's pretty cohesive. However, if you're reading somebody like Seneca or Cicero, and even Cicero is not really a Stoic. He's kind of a weird amalgamation of things, but that's besides the point. The thing is that when you get later on into the Roman history, the history of the Roman Empire, and looking at the later Stoics, they're a bit different than the earlier Stoics. Mm-hmm. And so you'll have people like Seneca who say that anger is kind of a useless emotion, kind of cut it out. But really, in reality, Stoicism is all about discipline and emotional control, not necessarily ridding yourself of emotions. So, and again, we'll get into Stoic philosophy, but just to clear up the misconception is that Stoics are not going to say that you don't experience emotions. And they're not going to say that initial reaction that you have is something that is completely unavoidable. If you are, the example that I read online was that let us say you are standing at a train station and you have a briefcase full of papers and the briefcase flies open and the papers gush out. A Stoic is not going to say, oh well, you shouldn't feel like flabbergasted or
Right.
or upset at that. Initially, you are going to. They would admit that is an unavoidable thing. However, it's more of, you have free will fundamentally, and you have the ability to reason. And so when you look at that emotion, you have to evaluate it and see if it is, and you have to contrast that with your character. Is this emotion healthy and good for my character? Is this good for virtuous living? And if it is not, then yes, they would say, cut it out, stop it. You are in control of yourself. Right. And that is an empowering thing, right? Because we think that it's like, well, I feel this way. And we live in a very emotionally distraught time. And I think that's why that's the appeal of Stoicism. And so they say you need to just very meticulously evaluate your emotions, not experience them. Okay. However, there are Stoics out there that would say, well, some emotions are hardly ever good, so therefore get rid of them. And and then that could be a criticism that you can level against them. And that remains to be seen in this work. But to get to your other one about being like monks or Jedi Knights or however you wanted to describe it, that they don't marry, they don't have kids. And I mean, for Epictetus, that may be true because he didn't marry and he didn't have kids. But the thing is that Stoics, typically they avoid the sensual pleasures, because you have to remember also at the same time you had the Epicureans that were going around, and you had the hedonists that were going around in the Hellenistic period that were advocating for sensual pleasure. Stoicism is against that. They are definitely dualists when it comes to theories of the soul, where Epictetus literally says that you are a soul embodying a corpse. Like he calls his body a donkey, brother ass. It's a stubborn, useless thing. And so they definitely have a negative view of that, certainly. But, you also have people, again, like Seneca, who say, sometimes you need to throw back some wine, man. You need to get drunk and kind of act insane a little bit and have a good time, Right. And it's like, it's hard to pin it down, but there are those misconceptions because it's understanding things in gradation, right? It's not it's not like 100% we are monks, do not feel anything. Yeah. they're definitely different than we are in how we kind of conceive of emotions and emotional values and things like that. But they're not people.
Right. So as we were researching Epictetus, because we knew he wanted to be our next guy, we referred to the Enchiridion at first, which is his short handbook.
Literally the handbook.
Right. And we learned that was actually just what's the term for it? Like an abridgment, an anthology of his greater work, Discourses.
Yeah. So I think. So let me find the quote really quick. Here it is. All right. So this quote is: "The shorter Enchiridion, titled in English either manual or handbook, as we said, is a brief abridgment of the Discourses, which is the book that we will actually be covering, apparently including the 4 or more additional volumes of Discourses that circulated in antiquity." So a lot of what we have from back then is in fragments. It's not complete. Unfortunately, this is also the case. As such, it offers a much attenuated account, which is of little independent value for the understanding of Epictetus's thought, and which at some points gives a misleading impression of his philosophical innovations.
So the Enchiridion is kind of like a bunch of fortune cookies, and it can be misleading because they're so fragmented.
Yeah.
But to truly understand him, we need to go to Discourses.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
But little side note, and now we're getting into the episode at that point, but he actually didn't write the Discourses. So
okay.
So which is funny enough, because when we did Plato, I mean, God, there's so many like one-to-one comparisons that you can bring between Epictetus and Socrates, right? Didn't marry, didn't have kids, and he never wrote his own stuff.
Okay. So, but it is believed he was a historical character. Somebody is writing his beliefs
no, Epictetus,
down.
we know more. There's no debate about
Right.
I don't know if anybody debates the existence of Socrates, because we know he lived, but Epictetus is definitely less mysterious than Socrates.
Okay.
It's not like if we go all the way back to the very first episode, it's like we knew that he was ugly and he killed himself with poison. Right? There's a little bit more to Epictetus than that. But again, a lot is not really known about his life. It is true.
But we do know that he was a slave at one point.
He was born a slave. Yeah.
He was born a slave, a cripple as well.
Yeah, so there's a funny story behind that too. So I'll start, and so it essentially, the biography is pretty quick. And we can go back and forth about the Roman history part of it. Maybe you'd be interested, maybe you won't. I don't know. Up to you.
Sure.
So he was actually born in Hierapolis, which is a city
Greece?
in actually Asia Minor, so modern Turkey.
Oh, okay.
But the Greeks during the Hellenistic period had basically colonized, Anatolia, that coastline there, and so there was a lot of intermingling. And so he was born as a slave. So his mother was a slave, and he was born to Epaphroditus, who actually was also a slave at one point. So Epaphroditus was a slave, became a freedman, and then purchased slaves. And then so Epictetus was born to him. So slavery in the Roman world is very different than what the average American would conceive of slavery as, because in actuality, and we'll see this with Epictetus, slaves could be educated, they could earn money, work in really fulfilling careers, and then purchase their freedom. And then they would actually go, and then that would actually allow in Roman society to establish connections. So what would happen is that you'll have a master who has these slaves. The slaves purchase their freedom or are granted freedom. And then the slaves would actually take the name of their former master, and then they would go and then have careers. And then they would be connected to their master. And so the master would end up, kind of advising them and helping them as they establish themselves, and then it would
like
go
a franchise.
Kind of. But then slavery also was dynamically different depending on what time in Roman history that you're talking about, because as Rome was expanding, there was more slaves, and so therefore there was less of a control on it. But when we start getting into the time where Epictetus is starting to write and teach Stoicism, there's a lot more control, because Rome was actually hitting the extent of its power.
Okay.
And we're at the height of the Pax Romana, so there's a lot more control put on slavery. But essentially, Epaphroditus he worked as an administrator. We don't really know his role, but he worked in the court of Emperor Nero.
Okay.
So, right. And so Epictetus worked alongside Epaphroditus. He was allowed to be educated, and actually he was educated by a Roman senator. And his name is Musonius Rufus. And he actually has some fragmented works that still survive to today. And he was a very ardent Stoic who gave a lot of practical wisdom, and so there's a lot of his influence that shines through Epictetus's work.
Okay.
So he's educated, and then he probably becomes free right around the time that Nero dies. So Nero actually committed suicide because
I heard he wasn't the best guy. Am I right about that?
yeah, he was a little out there. And the reason why Nero committed suicide was because there was actually a plot that was discovered to restore the Roman Republic, which failed. But then what ended up happening was that after that plot, there was this movement for like a rebellion that was going to occur, and where somebody was going to try to depose of Nero, and then the Praetorian Guard betrayed him, and so he ended up committing suicide when he found out about it. And so funny enough is that Epaphroditus was the one who helped Nero commit suicide.
Really? Okay.
Right.
Wow.
So then Epaphroditus ends up being murdered by I think it's sorry.
Every time we talk about Roman history, I feel like I'm stepping into Star Wars, and I hate Star Wars now, but it's just so grand and epic and operatic.
It is. So he's actually executed by Emperor Domitian. Yeah, Emperor Domitian. And because he says that he should have saved Nero instead of helping him commit suicide. And so Epaphroditus actually plays, but then funny enough is that Domitian is killed because Epaphroditus, because after he killed Epaphroditus, the chambermaid, or the guy who basically worked in his chamber, who's like his assistant, loved Epaphroditus, not romantically, but like he had he was affectionate towards him, and so he ends up working with like the man who's trying to depose of, and this is where you get into the Year of the Four Emperors, but then he ends up stabbing Domitian in the groin multiple times.
What the heck?
Because he killed Epaphroditus.
That's amazingly epic. Okay. So then Epictetus, what happens to him after Epaphroditus is killed?
So, Epictetus ends up being freed, but then he starts teaching in Rome. And then Domitian actually banished like philosophers from Rome in 89 AD. So he like
smart. That's a good move.
So then he ends up being expelled around 89, and then he goes to Nicopolis, which is a town on the western coast of Greece, and he establishes his own school there. And then there he adopts like a young boy like who was formerly a slave, and then he frees him, and then he ends up just teaching there until he dies. And it becomes a very famous and pretty much renowned school in the Mediterranean basin from there on out. So kind of, there's a lot of political intrigue at the time that he was living with, so after Nero dies, you have the time of the Four Emperors, and that 1 year, everybody's just like killing each other. And then you have the rise of Domitian, and then, he falls off, and it's a lot of back and forth. We could go over that. But the thing is that, the main thing is that he kind of just teaches in Rome.
Right.
We know he teaches in Rome. He ends up leaving, goes to Greece, establishes a very successful school, and then that's it. And he has his.
Now, how did he become crippled?
So, two stories. One is the idea that he had not a defect, but he had some sort of disease that just made him crippled. I forget what it was exactly, but that's the most likely scenario. Is that he just had some sort of illness that ended up making that leg lame. But the folk story, which is what everybody wants to hear, is that the idea was that one day he was being punished by his master, and of course this story is supposed to demonstrate the stoic nature of Epictetus,
right.
And so he's like twisting his leg brutally, and then Epictetus is not showing any sort of remorse or any sort of pain. He goes, "You are going to break my leg if you keep twisting it." And then to which then his master continues to twist the leg, and then he breaks his leg. And then so the leg never healed properly, and then to which Epictetus said after he breaks his leg, he says, "See, I told you would break my leg if you kept twisting it."
It's a pretty relaxed answer.
And that's the story. And so,
wow.
But the most likely scenario is that, He probably, I don't imagine his master just sitting there just going, ha, and then breaking his leg. So
and him somehow keeping it all together. So here's another thought that we've talked about in the past about what makes him and the Stoics so incredible. Now, bearing in mind that slavery at the time was not as can we say it wasn't as brutal as like American slavery, or does it really depend on?
I would be careful.
Okay, so then maybe this is fair. To look at this guy, and so much of what he said, at least in the Enchiridion, is about maintaining your disposition and your self-control in the midst of heavy trial. This is not some emperor, living in his luxurious palace telling you that. This is a man who is suffering, has suffered throughout his life.
Yeah, he lived in slavery. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So we've heard that. And then the remarkable thing to pair that with also that, I've heard is to run that up against Marcus Aurelius, who also, I'm sure, was a different form of Stoicism a little bit, but he was emperor of the known world and he preached the same message.
Yeah.
And that's what I've heard makes Stoicism so unique, is that from the bottom of the barrel, like Epictetus, to Marcus Aurelius, you have this similar worldview where both men seem to find some sort of peace in it and understanding. Are those fair things to consider?
It is a remarkable thing to point out that, so Epictetus dies around 135 AD. And so then there are a number of emperors that so he kind of dies around the time of Hadrian, who was emperor. And then you have Hadrian, Antonius Pius, and then you have Marcus Aurelius. I'm right. Cool. So therefore Marcus Aurelius is actually reigning a little bit after Epictetus, and not at the same time, but there is a lot of overlap, and it's kind of impressive to see, Marcus Aurelius write his Meditations, and it's like, wow, there's a lot of, like, he really embodied Stoicism, and it's kind of incredible that this is something that it can be applied to both the haves and the have-nots, because it is a philosophy that is deeply, deeply, deeply uncaring towards like whatever your lot in life would be. It has no concern for whatever those differences may be. But one of the things that people also point out in that same vein of thought is that Marcus Aurelius, there's been a lot of debate amongst historians about how successful he was as an emperor. He is known as one of the 5 good emperors. I mean, he's not as good as my boy Nerva. Nerva is my favorite Roman emperor. So if you're a listener out there and you're kind of interested in finding out a little bit more about Emperor Nerva, give him a look. He is incredible.
Interesting. Okay.
And so Marcus Aurelius is known as one of the 5 good emperors and the last one. But there's a lot of some controversy there. A disease breaking out perhaps and killing 5 million people and increased wars and all that kind of stuff. So he wasn't able to really relax in the way that he wanted to, unfortunately. But
interesting. Okay, so there's some discrepancy. That'll keep us on our toes. Now, what is next that we should discuss in this episode before we move into actual content episodes where we dissect the work?
Yeah, I think we can introduce a little bit about what Stoicism is, perhaps.
Yes, we've spoken of it as if everyone listening kind of knows
it.
So
right.
Yeah, maybe can you give us some central tenets? And again, you mentioned that it evolved over time and space, but generally, what are the staple principles?
Right. So some historical context there as well. Stoicism gets started during the Hellenistic period. So the Hellenistic period is known as, like, generally speaking, the death of Alexander the Great, and the reason why that is because Alexander the Great conquered much of the known world, and what ended up happening is that when he died, I believe at the age of 32,
Didn't he
from
die
malaria.
of like a cold? Oh,
no,
malaria. Okay.
I think he caught it in India. So yeah, he went all the way to India, fought elephants and won. This guy's insane. So, I mean, listen, if you could wear the head of a lion like on your head and get away with it. So anyway,
yeah, try that today.
So then his Cecil. So then, so on his death, his generals ended up splitting his empire. So then they all kind of had their own little ruling going on in their own dynasties or whatever. And then from that point all the way to basically the start of the Roman Empire, which is, I guess you could say 32 BC. And so that's the marker, right?
Okay.
And so it's a time of basically the height of Greek culture. It's an upwelling in literature and philosophy. A lot of new schools of thought are coming out, and there's a lot of change going on. There's a lot of questioning because basically the status quo has been upended, and you have all these new powers jockeying for positions. Mm-hmm. So one of those is Stoicism, and so the guy who starts it, his name is Zeno Citium, and Zeno Citium shows up in Greece and Athens. Starts to learn under the Cynics, and then he creates his own school. And the reason why Stoicism gets its name is because he taught under a stoa, which is like a portico balcony known as a stoa. So Stoicism. So Stoicism comes from the stoa. And so primarily, not a lot of his work survives, very fragmented stuff, but it was always a ethical philosophy, one based on logic, physics, ethics, very grounded kind of stuff. And then, of course, following that, you have other people, Cleanthes, Chrysippus. They kind of come around and start to develop the doctrine a lot more. Chrysippus more than anybody else. He's known as the second founder of Stoicism, but they're the three heads. And then Epictetus comes around after that, and Epictetus is actually so important that he's regarded as one of one of those three. Mm-hmm. He's stated among them. So I mean. What is it? I guess in my notes, I kind of wrote that it is first we should understand it and present it and approach it as first and foremost a philosophy of ethics, that it is a philosophy of ethics that seeks to treat suffering and woes. Everybody's going through stuff. Everybody suffers. Everybody has woes that they have to deal with. This is a philosophy geared towards that specifically, how to live life well. And so I'm going to throw words that you should be familiar with, but it is about the achievement of eudaimonia.
Not thumos? No, I'm
kidding. Eudaimonia, which is happiness, just a general being of happiness. And so that's the goal. And what Epictetus is going to argue is that there's going to be a word that I'm going to keep bringing up as well. So the word that he uses is prohairesis. So prohairesis is about how to say. So he says that it's not. So we use the word originally as arete. Remember, about excellence, like virtuous excellence, and that's how you achieve eudaimonia. That's how typically it was. Epictetus kind of changes the game, where he uses prohairesis, and prohairesis is more about about a stable being, stable character, like being able to find yourself in a position, in a place, and then having stability in that, and maintaining that in your character, prohairesis. And so those are basically the two main things about Stoicism. And the third thing that I would say specifically, and I think you're very well aware of this, is that there are things that are, how to put it, really the only way to achieve eudaimonia is through virtuous character, is to embody and live out virtue. And the way you do that is that you find that there are things that are preferred and there are things that are unpreferred. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Preferred is like just things that you like to have happen to you, right? So you like to eat a good meal, you like to be warm, you like to be married, you like to have financial stability.
Right.
Those are preferred things. Unpreferred things are obviously the opposite of those things, and so unpreferred is like a divorce or going hungry or being cold. Those are unpreferred things, the opposites. And so what Stoicism is going to advocate for is that both of those things, preferred and unpreferred, are things that exist out of what is good, which means virtue. So virtue is what is good.
Right. Okay.
And they also exist outside of vice and acting in a vice nature, which is known as evil to the Stoic. Okay. Mm-hmm. So if both of those, so those things have value in the sense that they are what they are. They're not the cynics where they say those things don't possess any value whatsoever, because the Stoics would say, well, achieving those things is obviously your will is being assented towards them. You are desiring those things.
Right.
However, and so therefore they may have a value. However, their value is outside of virtue, and it's outside of vice. They just are things that you pursue.
It's like two different currencies.
Yeah.
They're valued in their respective realm.
So then what Epictetus is going to say is that those two things, whether they're preferred or unpreferred, is going to be indifferent. And so he says, so the main thing is understanding that those things are indifferent to us. And because they're indifferent, they shouldn't really be of the utmost concern to us. And so therefore he's restructuring our orientation of how we live, right? So he's saying all these things that you may be pursuing and that you're trying to avoid, those things are actually indifferent to how you act.
Yeah.
And so you living virtuously is independent of the preferred and the unpreferred. They are now indifferent. And so really the question is more of a matter of, are you acting virtuously regardless of the circumstance? So even though you may be pursuing romance or warmth or a full belly, are you pursuing those things virtuously? And let us say you are hungry, cold, and unloved. Are you living virtuously? Because guess what? Virtue is indifferent. It is outside of the indifference.
Yes.
That is really, and of course there are other things that go into that. So then you have to get into epistemology, the idea of impressions, the idea of a discipline and the assent. There's a lot of other concepts that come out of that, specifically the idea of volition and how fundamentally we are free people with the ability to reason, and the ability to make choices. And so he would say that, as a quote, the very notion of a capacity to make one's own decisions implies, as a matter of logical necessity, that those decisions are free of external compulsion. Otherwise, they would not be decisions.
Right. Then it's coercion.
Right. And so he would say, since the decisions are truly ours, our volition, that means that who you is really your actions.
I need to write this down.
Okay, keep going, because I'm going to keep going.
Go.
So let's marry the two ideas. So if who you are is really your character, your actions, your attitude, your aspirations, your desires, then therefore those are the things. And so that's why volition is important, because that means those things are uniquely yours. They are in your control. Whereas the things that are indifferent to you, the things that you are pursuing or you're desiring, or the things that maybe other people are doing and how they're acting, those are all outside of your control. And so fundamentally, Epictetus is saying, find out, put things in their right order, say those things are indifferent. I have free will. I have freedom of choice. Fundamentally, that I have the ability to reason and find out what is good for me and what is bad for me, how to act in right character, right, by evaluating things as they're impressed upon my soul. And then we'll talk about that, epistemology and Stoicism. So I'm just going to glance that now.
Sure.
And say, guess what? I am in control of how I act, my character, how I approach these things. And that is what matters. That is what matters most, because my desire is to achieve eudaimonia. And eudaimonia can only be achieved through the practice of virtue and the avoiding of vice. And so he says, control your character, and live well in spite of whatever may be going on, whatever the circumstances are. That is at the very core of it, the very core of Stoicism, if I'm making sense. Like, I hope that I hope I'm.
Can I regurgitate a little bit, and then you can?
Sure.
I
didn't even bring up the concept of God and living in accordance with nature.
Yes, I was about to say. So the other thing we need to talk about is their idea of providence, right? I remember
so
that
fate, there's fate in God in it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was the first time I recognized that idea coming up was in the Stoics. But okay, so let me vomit and up my little puke, and then you can chop it up and shape it into something beautiful. Sure. Plato was about virtue excellence,
yes,
and arete, right? Moving, ordering your soul in. We talked about all that,
Yeah, go back and listen.
I'm exhausted just thinking about it. Whereas Epictetus is going to take aim a little more towards stability of behavior.
Yes.
Because
let's say discipline. The word we should use
that's
is
the
discipline.
word. Yes, hold on. Let me write that down. Discipline. Because
Have you guys realized that Austin likes Stoicism? I don't know if you noticed yet.
It's good. It's good stuff. And so he would say that who someone is and their actions are one and the same. Actions represent your will, your desires, and your character. And so
those are all part of your volition.
Right. Because and that's the big word. If and so we should spend less time worrying about what is out of our control and realize what is in control exclusively is our actions.
Yes.
And so it's very focused on that behavioral action, volition.
Right, regardless of whatever is indifferent to us.
Right.
Like don't worry about the guy who cut you off in traffic.
Mm-hmm.
You can't control that. Don't worry about the wind blowing your papers away. And honestly, he would even say, don't worry about the death that has occurred in your family. All these things are outside of your control. Control you. Worry about you.
Yes. Now, okay, so to move into providence, there's one quote that I remember from the Enchiridion that might bridge us into that part of the conversation well.
Well, I want to leave something for the future.
Yeah. So maybe we could talk about fate really quick, and then pretty much be done from there. But what I remember is this. He said, "You are like an actor in a play. You did not pick your role. That was the director. And so your job is to play your particular role well, not to question or search for a different role, but to trust that the director knew what he was doing." So that's got a little bit of that personal action choice in there, but there's a heavy weight that I sense in that quote on providence. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say without giving away too much is that the conception of God in Epictetus's framework is a bit different than what we would kind of reference to as in a Judeo-Christian understanding of like an active agent. So I would just say that let's instead flip the word that we're using from God to natural order. Okay. And so for Epictetus, he says that there is reason that is underpinning the cosmology of the world, that there is an order to things, that nature has a direction, has purpose, has an epistemic and a teleological purpose to it.
So it's more like the Force then.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So then, except I hate Star Wars.
Right.
So,
me too. I hate Star Wars.
So the thing is, I hope none of our listeners are like deeply offended by the fact that I don't really care much for Star Wars.
They could stop listening.
Stop.
That's an option.
So then, wow. Don't stop listening.
Or they could get good opinions.
Sorry. Cut all this out. That has to be cut out.
Okay. I will definitely cut this out. So there's an unconscious force of reason and order.
Yeah, I'm not gonna I'm trying to keep it light, but the idea is that there's a natural order to things, that nature has its end, has an epistemic and teleological purpose to it, that there's a rational order to things, and that thing may be called God or Zeus or whatever.
Sure.
And so that rational order to nature is benevolent, is good, and what it seeks is that you would be a part of it. Mm-hmm. That is because you fundamentally is in your nature is a part of it. So in a way, it's kind of, there's a lot of similarities to Buddhism, actually, in a weird way. But the main thing is that in the same way that you don't choose the role, that is all correct. And so you have to play well. Like you can either, you can kind of fight against nature, or you can be with nature. At the end of the day, the grave takes us all. And so, but how do you want to live, and so in living in accordance with the natural order to things, and living in accordance to the rational order of nature, is that's kind of the big metaphysical curtain around Stoicism. It's the mystical side of it, in
Right.
which it's like at the end of the day, eudaimonia is really can be understood as being one and with the natural order, accepting fate, accepting the fact that we are passengers on a river flowing down the bend, and that we didn't choose this, but we are in control of our actions, and so we should just live well with what we have. And and obviously, again, there's a lot of attraction to that. There's a lot of beauty to that. You can see a lot of nods to Buddhism, and basically it has a kind of a mystical quality to it almost. I wouldn't go so far as to say it is mystical, but that they say it is, the universe is deeply rational, and
Right.
so maybe you don't understand it, but you play your part, and
Okay.
all things ebb and flow and come out of existence. It never belonged to you. They would say something along the lines that, like, if let's say, tragically, if I died tomorrow, and then so a Stoic would look at you and say, Austin, he was here temporarily anyway, and you enjoyed his existence when he was here, and he now goes back. He goes back to the world. He never belonged to you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm still seeing some similarity with the Jedi, but
Sure.
this is really helpful stuff. So I'm seeing keywords being like we said, discipline, fate, even that trust in fate. Maybe those two go together. It's not just that there is a fate, but trust it.
Rational reason. I mean, that's still, obviously, you see a lot of influences
Right.
from Plato. There's,
Wonderful.
well-ordered soul kind of
yes,
stuff coming
yeah.
in. So I'm going to actually read some quotes from Epictetus to kind of round it out.
Okay.
I think it would be kind of fun.
Do it.
So so I'll just go down the list. I wrote, I think, 5 quotes. So
1.
man is not worried by real problems so much as by his imagined anxieties about real problems. So there's a lot of comedy with the Stoics, right? A lot of quips. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
2.
He says, I have to die. If it is now, well, then I die now. If later, then now I will take my lunch, since the hour for lunch has arrived. In dying, I will tend to later.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. That sounds like the sort of thing you'd have like some martial arts sensei would tell you.
Yeah, in a way. But, again, I'm in control of what I'm in control, and I worried about the present, how I'm acting right now. Happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. So this is actually a really good quote.
Wait, this is 3, right?
This is
okay.
the third one.
3.
Dang it. Happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within our control, and some things are not. It is only after you have faced up to this fundamental rule and learned to distinguish between what you can and can't control that inner tranquility and outer effectiveness become possible.
I'm so mad. Right. Just this morning, I told Sarah, yesterday, I told Sarah, I was like, hey, Sarah's my wife, by the way, if I haven't talked about her enough on the show. I said, something I've realized that I need to work on is that I'm a very impatient person, and I'm very critical of things that are done wrong around me. And there are things that I have no control over, and it still makes me upset. This sounds like the perfect antidote to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Where we get so worked up over this crap, but this worldview of just identifying what's in your control and what's not, just starting there, that's just really practical. I love it.
And the last one, 5.
5.
I said 5.
Wait, I didn't say 4. When did 4 happen?
When something happens, the only thing in your power is your attitude toward it. It is not the things that disturb us, but our interpretation of their significance. Things and people are not what we wish them to be, nor are they what they seem to be. They are what they are.
Yeah, he's pretty cool.
Yeah.
He's a pretty cool guy. I think we're going to have fun with this one. Not that we didn't have fun with Plato.
I'm going to miss Plato. Oh, well.
Yeah. Well, we got to move on because he's gone. Awesome. Well, this was a very fun introduction, and I think this will set the expectation right as we move into this work, that people who maybe didn't fully understand Stoicism or have a survey understanding going in now, we can kind of embark on this quest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Knowing what to expect. And so we will begin. Will we start with the book's introduction, or will we go right into his writing specifically?
That remains to be seen.
So a surprise for the listener to await on. So thank you for joining us. This has been fun. We're very excited to get into this work. And I don't remember anything else I'm supposed to say at this point. So Aaron, what are the social media things?
Okay, so a few changes is so new graphics are there. So just get used to that. So if you're found this episode and you got people that you're encouraging people to listen to it, just be mindful of the fact that new graphics are going to come out for every single series that we do, just to pay homage to the thinker that we're currently covering. We found that was important to us. We didn't want to leave it just the one consistent one. Additionally, be sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter. So at Academy_podcast, you find us on both of those sites. Just cute little behind the scenes stuff that we put out. And also the big thing that's coming out very, very soon is a Facebook group for the podcast. And then so there we will be posting all the additional content, as well as having discussion boards for you guys to, and you'll be able to engage. Yeah, you'll actually be able to message me and engage me, and whenever I'm on there, and then hopefully I can answer your questions, or we can get into fights and I'll remove you from the group.
Yes,
it'll be
yes. Do I have to make a Facebook now? Because that sounds like really fun, but I haven't had a Facebook in years.
You can do whatever you want.
I don't know. Okay, maybe.
I highly encourage
MySpace. I'll be on MySpace if you guys want to talk to me. So I think I saw somebody reference their MySpace the other day. It was weird. So, yes, and the last thing is, if you would like to email us your thoughts, questions, or recommendations, of course, you can head over to your email provider and shoot us over some text from, we are the Academy Podcast at Outlook.com. Microsoft was the last one that was not taken. So that's our home base. I think that's all. Any other final words?
That's it. We and so we were recording this around Christmas time. So we want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We hope that your families and yourself are well rested and just completely enjoying the holiday time. That it's not stressful. That it's not dysfunctional. And that
Yes.
you just take this time to just really make good memories, be with each other. And remember the important things in life, the meaningful things in life. And so, peace and joy to all of mankind. And hopefully this episode will bring you tidings of comfort and joy.